Welcome to 3:15 o'clock, that very channel where the unspoken becomes unforgettable. Do you have the courage to explore the stories they always wanted to hide from you? This is not just a horror channel. This is a place where silence is shattered by secrets, and every story carries a weight of fear it was never meant to bear.
The first story. The ticket to Albuquerque cost exactly $75.37. That was the exact amount of change I had found in the pocket of my late husband's overcoat when I bought it on that rainy Tuesday. The conductor, taking the money, didn't look me in the eyes, and his fingers were icy, as if he had just removed his gloves. I almost pulled my hand back but caught myself in time. Rudeness is not the best companion for a journey that was already difficult for me. "Thank you," I muttered. But he had already turned away, his dark blue uniform merging with the twilight gloom of the platform. I was left standing with a thin cardboard ticket in my hand on which faded, almost washed out ink read, Phantom Express, Car 13, Seat 4B. Irony of fate or an ominous omen. Thomas, my husband, loved ghost stories. He would have appreciated it. A gulp of cold air made me shiver. I tightened my grip on the small dark wood urn nestled comfortably in my bag. His last wish. To scatter his ashes over the Grand Canyon, where he and his grandfather had once hunted for sunrises and silence. The train stood at the platform as if it had emerged from another time. The deep, velvety black color of the cars absorbed the meager light from the streetlights, and the polished copper trim reflected the orange glow of the distant city lights. There was no fuss, no farewell kisses, no familiar hum of a crowd. Just me, this silent train, and the wind howling somewhere in the distance. I entered the designated car. The air inside was still and stale, smelling of old books, dust, and something else sweet, like wilted flowers. The salon was bathed in semi-darkness, with only a few Art Nouveau sconces casting intricate patterns of light and shadow on the walls and ceiling. The carpet runners were a deep burgundy, absorbing all sound. I counted only a few passengers. They sat motionless, scattered throughout the salon like statues. A man in a three-piece suit and a bowler hat pulled low over his forehead. A woman in a long dress with a high collar, her face hidden in the shadow of a feathered hat. Another couple young people, he in a World War I soldier's uniform, she in a simple calico dress. They all stared out the windows, where night was already gathering, but their gazes were empty, fixed on nothing. I quietly made my way to my window seat. The leather seat felt cold through the thin fabric of my dress. I pressed the bag with the urn to my chest, trying to find a drop of comfort in the gesture. The train started moving silently, without the usual jolt and clang. Just the world outside the window began to drift backward, soundlessly and smoothly, like in a bad dream. The conductor walked through the salon, checking tickets. His footsteps made no sound. He glided between the seats, and when he leaned toward a passenger, they silently handed him their equally pale tickets without looking up or uttering a word. He reached me. His fingers touched my ticket again, and again that freezing cold. "Traveling far, ma'am?" he asked in a voice devoid of timbre or emotion, only a light rustle. "Like dry leaves." "To Albuquerque," I replied, and my voice sounded unnaturally loud in the tomb-like silence. He nodded, slowly, as if his head were a heavy weight. "A long journey. I advise you to rest. The night will be long." He moved on, leaving me in the grip of growing anxiety. I turned to the window. The city lights had long disappeared, replaced by a featureless, black desert. The moon, full and unnaturally large, hung in a starless sky, flooding the endless expanses of Arizona with a deathly light. Sand and rocks, sand and rocks. Nothing alive. Not a single ranch light, no traces of roads. Only this soulless, majestic emptiness. I tried to read, but the letters blurred before my eyes. Sleep wouldn't come. The silence in the car wasn't just an absence of sound. It was dense, heavy, oppressive. I began to detect other sounds within it. A very quiet sigh. A grating noise, like the creaking of old wood. a whisper in which no words could be distinguished, but which made my blood run cold. I risked a look at my fellow passengers. They hadn't changed their positions. The soldier was tenderly holding his companion's hand, but his fingers weren't interlaced with hers. They lay on top, pale and motionless, like marble. The woman with the feathered hat occasionally turned her head, and the moonlight would momentarily illuminate her face. It was beautiful and utterly impassive, with eyes that held nothing but deep, bottomless sorrow. A sorrow vast enough to fill all the world's deserts. A primal horror gripped me. This wasn't just a feeling of loneliness or strangeness. It was a knowledge, instinctive and undeniable, that I was not among the living. That I was stuck in an elevator taking the wrong passengers to the other side. To distract myself, I lowered my hand to the seat beside me and touched a folded newspaper. It was yellowed, brittle, the edges crumbling. I unfolded it. The Santa Fe Sentinel. The headline read, the date, October 17th, 1923. My heart hammered in my throat. I leafed through the crispy pages until my gaze fell on a large headline on the third page. Asterisk asterisk, tragedy in the desert, Phantom Express derailed, nitrogen monoxide survivors. Asterisk asterisk. The article told of a luxurious private train traveling from Chicago to Los Angeles. During the night, near the Grand Canyon, a landslide had caused the train to derail and plunge into a ravine. All passengers and crew perished. Search teams were never able to find the bodies or the wreckage. The gorge was too deep and inaccessible. The train and its passengers had vanished without a trace. A list of the deceased was printed below. I scanned the names. Mr. Arthur Pennyworth, the man in the bowler hat. Mrs. Eleanor Van Doren, the woman with the feathered hat. Corporal James McCoy and his fiancée, Alice Turner. I slowly raised my head and looked around the salon. At the pale, silent figures in their old-fashioned clothes. At the conductor, frozen at the end of the car, his face now turned toward me, and in his eyes, finally visible, danced reflections of the moonlight, cold, lifeless. This was not a train. This was a hearse. A funeral procession carrying the souls of the dead to their final resting place, to the site of the crash that had become their eternal trap. They had been traveling there for 100 years. And I, a living person by some monstrous mistake, had bought a ticket for this final ride. At that moment, the train braked sharply with a piercing screech of metal. I was thrown forward. The world around me froze, then plunged into an absolute silence, even more oppressive than before. The engine fell silent. We were standing in the middle of nowhere. The same lunar landscape outside the window, the same emptiness. The passengers began to stir. Slowly, as if awakening from a century-long sleep, they turned their heads. Their gazes, filled with that same eternal sorrow I had seen earlier, were now fixed on me. I was an outsider, an intruder, a stain of warm, pulsating life in their world of cold death. The conductor moved toward me. His steps on the burgundy carpet were soundless, but each approaching step echoed in my temples like a dull beat. "We have arrived," he rustled, stopping by my seat. His icy breath touched my face. "Arrived? But this is the desert. I squeezed out. "The place of rest," he corrected. His white-gloved hand pointed to the window. "Everyone is getting off." The passengers rose from their seats. They didn't look at each other, only at me and at the door at the end of the car. Their movements were smooth, aimless, but held an inexorable resolve. "I'm not from here," I screamed, clutching the armrests. My voice rose to a screech. "I'm alive. You have to let me go." The conductor leaned toward me. His face was a mask of polite indifference, but his eyes danced with sparks of cruel curiosity. "The ticket is purchased. The payment is accepted. The rules are the same for everyone, ma'am." He reached out his hand to me. I flinched back, pressing the bag with Thomas's ashes to me. Its wooden surface suddenly seemed the only warm and real thing in this nightmare. Suddenly, I remembered. $75.37. Such a strange amount. Change from the pocket of my dead husband's coat. A purchase on a rainy day. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a ritual. The fare for the passage to the other world. And I, unknowingly, had paid it. The passengers surrounded my seat. They didn't threaten, didn't reach out. They just stood there, silently. Their collective silence was worse than any screams. It pressed down, sapped my will, drained hope. "No," I whispered. "No, I won't get off." The conductor shook his head. "No one stays here against their will. But no one leaves either. You either join the procession or you stay here, forever, alone." He waved his hand, and the passengers as one turned and floated toward the exit. They passed through the locked door as if through mist, disappearing into the moonlight of the desert. Soon, only the conductor and I remained in the car. Outside the window, in the deathly moonlight, I saw them. They lined up, standing facing the darkness of the chasm, which I couldn't see but whose presence I felt with every fiber of my being. The abyss that had been waiting for them for 100 years. "Last chance, ma'am," said the conductor. His figure began to lose clarity, becoming transparent. I understood what he meant. Staying here didn't just mean sitting in the car. It meant becoming part of the train. A ghost among ghosts, forever shuttling along this route of despair. A desperate thought pierced my fear. The urn, Thomas's ashes, his last wish, the Grand Canyon. We were at the destination. Only this destination wasn't for me. Gathering the last of my strength, I jumped up from the seat. "I will fulfill his wish," I said, looking into the conductor's empty eyes. I rushed to the door and flung it open. An icy desert wind hit my face. Sand crunched under my feet. Before me, a few steps away, gaped a blackness. The edge of a cliff. The abyss. The ghost stood on the edge, ready to step into their eternal fall. I unscrewed the lid of the urn and, without looking, poured the gray ashes into the night. The wind caught them, scattering them over the chasm. "Goodbye, Thomas," I whispered. And at that same moment, something changed. The air shuddered. The moonlight seemed to soften. I heard a distant, but so alive and real sound, the sound of falling water. It was the Grand Canyon. The real one. The Colorado River was flowing somewhere below. I turned around. The train was gone. In its place was only the desert, lit by the moon. But the conductor still stood nearby. Now he looked at me not with indifference, but with something resembling respect. "You fulfilled your duty," he said. His voice lost its rustling quality, gaining a shadow of something human. "He has found peace. And you paid for the ticket not only with money. You paid with the fulfillment of a will. What should I do?" I asked, trembling from cold and adrenaline. He pointed to a barely visible path leading away from the cliff. "Walk toward the sound of the water. Walk and don't look back. Dawn is near." I took a step, then another. I didn't look back, though I felt his presence fading like morning mist. I walked toward the sound of the river by feel, stumbling over stones. The sky in the east began to lighten. When the first rays of the sun touched my cheeks, I fell to my knees and wept. I was alive. I was free. 5 years have passed since then. I never told this story. Who would believe me? But sometimes, on a dark night when the wind wails especially plaintively, I think I hear the distant sound of a train whistle. And I know that the Phantom Express is still running its route, collecting those who have paid their strange price for a passage into eternity. And I just look out the window, holding a cup of hot tea, and thank fate for that dawn in the desert that brought me home. But a part of me remained forever in that car, in that oppressive silence, among the passengers whose journey will never end.
The second story. The only rule my employer gave me was deceptively simple. Do not look at the package. Just deliver this steel safe from Chicago to San Francisco. Get off on the rear platform when the train slows on the siding, and hand it to the man in the red cap. The money he offered was as astronomical as the rule was absurd. For that kind of money, I was ready to deliver the devil himself without asking questions. But he didn't warn me that there would be a ticking sound coming from it. Now, sitting in the semi-darkness of the baggage car of the Pacific Express, I was ready to give up half my fee to throw the damn thing off the tracks. But I couldn't. I am a professional. My name is Leo Vargas, and I'm the one you trust to deliver things you're better off not asking about. I've transported everything from diamonds warmed in bloody shootouts to documents that could start wars. But never before had a package spoken to me. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The sound was quiet but persistent, like a drop of water falling on the forehead of a condemned man. It seeped through the thick steel walls of the safe, which stood in the middle of the car, chained to the floor for high-value cargo. I tried to ignore it, buried in a worn-out detective novel, but the words blurred before my eyes, turning into a rhythmic pattern. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. The train picked up speed, and the monotonous clatter of the wheels merged with the ticking into some kind of hellish, dissonant orchestra. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe deeper. Just 40 hours, Vargas. Get a grip. Just sit here like a piece of furniture and it will be over. But the ticking didn't stop. Moreover, it was changing. At first it lagged behind the rhythm of the train, then it caught up, and after an hour, I realized with horror that both sounds had merged into perfect synchrony. Tick-tock matched clack-clack. It was no longer a coincidence. It was as if something inside the safe was listening to the world outside, adjusting, learning. I stood up and walked to the barred window. Outside, the outlines of unfamiliar towns, lonely farms, and endless fields rushed by in the darkness. America was asleep, and I was awake in a steel coffin on wheels, keeping company with a ticking Pandora's box. Do not look at the package, echoed in my head. But how can you not look at a thing that insistently knocks on your consciousness? It wasn't just a sound. There was flesh to it, a sensation of life. Sometimes I thought I heard something like a wet click between the ticks, a faint hiss as if some tiny mechanical creature were breathing. By midnight, I had stopped reading. I just sat and stared at the safe. The chain wrapped around it cast strange shadows from the single dim bulb under the ceiling. The shadows moved with the sway of the car, and I imagined they were moving on their own, like tentacles. I remembered the employer's face. A man in a perfectly pressed suit, with hands that had never known physical labor. His eyes were empty like a dead fish's. He didn't smile, he didn't frown. He just laid out the terms. What's inside? I asked then, breaking my own rule of not asking questions. Not your business, Mr. Vargas. Your business is to deliver it, safe and sound. The integrity of the cargo is a matter of life and death. Literally. Now that phrase was taking on a new, sinister meaning. Suddenly, the ticking quickened. It broke away from the rhythm of the wheels and rattled like a crazy metronome before an exam. My own heart responded with a panicked staccato. I jumped up, pressing my palms to my ears. Useless. The sound didn't come from outside. It came from inside me, from the very core of my fear. It lasted for a minute, maybe two. Then the ticking just as abruptly returned to its previous synchronized rhythm, as if it were just testing its boundaries. Or my nerves, that was the breaking point. The rational part of my brain, the one that made me the best in my business, screamed for me to sit still and not move. But another part, ancient, animalistic, the part that fears the unknown more than a specific threat, had already taken over. I couldn't spend another 20 hours in this torture chamber. I needed to know. I had to see. I looked around. The car was packed with ordinary luggage, suitcases, crates, boxes. But in the corner next to the conductor's tools, I noticed a crowbar and a set of heavy wrenches. The decision came instantly, washing over me with an icy calm that replaced all the previous panic. Yes, it was a breach of contract. Yes, it could cost me my reputation and possibly my life. But living with this clicking worm in my brain was no longer an option. I took the crowbar. It was cold and heavy in my hand. As I approached the safe, I felt the ticking grow louder, as if anticipating the intrusion, or welcoming it. I inserted the end of the crowbar into the gap between the door and the body. The metal groaned. I put my whole weight into it. Nothing. The safe was built to last. Then I took the largest wrench and began methodically hitting the lock. The clang of metal on metal was deafening, drowning out the hateful tick-tock for a moment. I was covered in sweat, my muscles burning, but I didn't stop. With a crack that sounded louder than any gunshot, the lock gave way. The door bounced open a few inches. The ticking stopped. A deafening silence fell, more frightening than any sound. It lasted what felt like an eternity. I froze, listening. Only the clatter of the wheels and the whistle of wind in the cracks of the car were audible. Slowly, almost reverently, I swung the heavy door open. What I saw made my mind crack at the seams. I expected a bomb, money, stolen technology, even some occult artifacts, but this was alive. Inside the safe, suspended on thick tendon-like wires, pulsated something huge, fleshy, the color of dark cherry. It resembled a giant heart, but not a human one. Something more ancient, monstrous. Faint electrical discharges ran across its surface, and tiny gears and cylinders of brass and polished ebony were embedded into the very flesh. Mechanics fused with organics in a terrifying, blasphemous symbiosis. It was beating. Thump, 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 thump. Each beat coincided with the clatter of the wheels over the rail joints. The train was its rhythm, its life. The wires on which it hung led to a small screen embedded in the roof of the safe. Green numbers glowed on the screen, counting down the time to arrival. 14:27:15. 14 hours, 27 minutes, 15 seconds, and then it hit me. This wasn't a mechanism. This was someone's heart, magically, technologically, hellishly tied to the path of the Pacific Express. If the train slowed down, was delayed, stopped, the heart would stop. And with it, I was sure, would die whoever it belonged to. The integrity of the cargo is a matter of life and death. The employer hadn't been joking. I was overcome with a mixture of disgust and morbid curiosity. I reached out to touch the pulsating flesh, but immediately pulled my hand back. It was warm, almost hot. At that moment, the train, picking up speed on a straight section, swayed slightly. One of the gears on the heart's surface turned and the ticking resumed. But now it sounded different, louder, more confident, as if the creature knew its secret had been revealed. I slammed the safe door shut, unable to look at the abomination any longer. But hiding from the knowledge was no longer possible. I was no longer just a courier. I was a nursemaid for this. This thing, the keeper of its pulse. Someone's life now depended on me. I collapsed onto some crates, staring at the floor. What had I done? Now I knew, and that knowledge was an unbearable burden. Every stop, every traffic signal, every slow turn would be answered by a panicked fear in my own heart. I had to pray that the train ran on time. Hours passed. I didn't sleep. I sat and listened. The ticking was now no longer an abstract torture, but the sound of a working engine on which everything depended. I began to discern nuances in its rhythm. When the train went downhill, it quickened. On an incline, it became heavier with a slight strain. It was a living speedometer. Dawn found me in the same position. The light filtering through the dirty window brought no relief. It only illuminated the ugly reality of my situation. I glanced at the screen. 6:11:02. Less than 7 hours to go. We were racing through the Nevada deserts, the sun beginning to heat the metal skin of the car. Everything was going according to plan. It was at that moment that I saw him. At first, it was just a dot in the distance. A human figure sitting on the tracks. The engineer must have seen it too, because a piercing, long whistle sounded. But the figure didn't move. The train rushed on relentlessly. The distance closed at a terrifying speed. I pressed against the window bars, not believing my eyes. It wasn't just a person. He was tied, shackled to the rails. His arms and legs were spread out like a fly in a web. He was wearing a red cap. An icy wave of horror washed over me, constricting my throat. The man in the red cap, the one I was supposed to deliver the cargo to. He was expected. He had been set up. I rushed to the car door looking for the emergency brake cord. My hand reached for it and froze. If I pulled the cord, the train would stop abruptly. The heart in the safe would freeze. Whoever's life was tied to it would die. Who was it? A child, a woman? An innocent hostage? Or a powerful monster whose death would plunge the world into chaos? I didn't know, but I also saw the man on the rails. A living man who was facing an agonizing death. Time slowed down. The locomotive's whistle became a continuous roar of despair. I saw the man's face. His wide-open, terror-filled eyes. He was looking right at me, at my face pressed against the glass. He was shouting something, but his words were drowned by the roar of steel. The ticking behind my back was loud, clear, like a verdict. 5:59:48. By 47. I was torn between two doors, one leading to the brake, the other to the safe with a beating heart. Save the stranger on the rails or the anonymous life linked to the cargo. Choose between the one you see and the one you know nothing about. It was torture. Every second counted. I screamed. Screamed from helplessness, from rage, from fear. But the roar of the wheels swallowed my cry too. The train did not slow down. I did not pull the brake. A few seconds before the impact, our eyes met. In his eyes I saw not just fear. I saw understanding. He knew I saw him, knew about the choice, and at the last moment his gaze held not a curse but pity. Then the inevitable happened. A dull, crushing thud. A slight tremor ran through the entire train. Something warm and sticky splattered on my window, staining it crimson. The train jerked, slowed for a moment, but then picked up speed again. The engineer must have realized that stopping would change nothing and only make the situation worse. I stood unable to move, staring at the bloody mess on the glass. A deafening silence rang in my ears, even though the train was still rumbling. A silence inside me, and then I turned to the safe. The ticking continued. Steady, confident. 5:58:11, but something had changed. The rhythm remained the same, but a new note had appeared in the sound itself. Swedish, triumphant, as if the heart was not just beating, but rejoicing. It had received what it wanted. A sacrifice. I walked over to the safe and swung the door open again. The pulsating organ now seemed larger, more saturated. The color had become more scarlet. The gears turned more smoothly. And on the small screen next to the countdown, a new line had appeared. A word spelled out in green pixels. Gratitude. I vomited. I sobbed, banged my head against the steel wall of the car, but I couldn't drown out that ticking. It was now a part of me. I had become an accomplice. I had made a choice. I had let a man be killed to preserve the life of this monster. The remaining hours of the journey became my personal hell. Every tick echoed in my soul with the memory of that impact. I saw his face, his red cap torn to shreds. When the train finally began to slow down approaching San Francisco, I looked like a ghost. I mechanically unhooked the safe and dragged it to the rear platform. The train stopped on a remote siding. I stepped onto the ground, barely able to stand. There was no one around, just the ocean wind and the cries of seagulls. I waited. Waited for the man in the red cap, knowing he would not come. His death was part of the ritual. The price for keeping that heart beating. But after a few minutes, the man in the perfect suit, my employer, stepped out from around the corner of the depot. His face was impassive. He was leading a little girl about 7 years old by the hand. She was pale with huge sad eyes. "Is the cargo intact?" he asked, not looking at me. I nodded silently, unable to utter a word. He walked over to the safe, opened the door a crack, and grunted in satisfaction. The girl timidly reached for the pulsating heart. "Daddy, is it pleased?" She whispered, "Yes, dear. It is pleased. Now you will live a long, long time." He turned to me and held out an envelope of money. I didn't take it. What
was that?
I exhaled. Who was that man on the tracks? The employer looked at me with his empty eyes. "The price, Mr. Vargas, just the price. Every beat requires energy. Every extension of life requires a sacrifice. You did your job. Forget this." He took the girl's hand and they walked away, rolling the safe behind them. I remained standing, listening as the ticking gradually faded into the distance until it was drowned out by the city noise. But I knew it would never fall silent for me. It would tick in my dreams, in moments of quiet. It would remind me of the price of my choice, that I had become a part of this mechanism of death and life extension. I did not forget. And I never will. Tick-tock, tick-tock, it is always with me. In the trunk of my car, in a dark corner of the room, in the depths of my own fear-filled heart, it is looking for a new victim. And I know that one day I will have to choose again. The third story. My 3-year-old daughter pointed down the aisle and said her first word of the day, clown. I turned around, but there was no one there. Only an endless succession of identical seats receding into the haze at the front of the California Zephyr train. The glass doors at the end of our car reflected the faded interior, creating an illusion of even more space. We had been traveling through the Rocky Mountains for 6 hours, and the monotonous rhythm of the wheels seemed to have swallowed all sound, including the voice of my little Lisa. There's no clown. Sweetheart, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I reached for a paper cup of cold coffee. This trip was my desperate attempt to bring a shred of normality back into our lives after Sarah's death. The doctor had said a change of scenery would do us both good, especially for Lisa's Eulalia, the stubborn silence she had sunk into after her mother's funeral. Lisa didn't argue. She just stared into the fog outside the window, her tiny fingers clutching the hem of her doll's dress. I sighed, looking at her reflection in the glass. She looked so much like Sarah. The same ash blonde hair, the same serious gaze of large gray eyes. The clown is funny, she said quietly a few minutes later. My heart skipped a beat. It was the first coherent sentence in the last 3 months. Not just a word, but a sentence. But its content made my skin crawl. Where is the clown, Lisa? She kept staring out the window, but her gaze was empty, as if she were seeing something inside herself. There, in the next house. He's waving at me. In the next car? I clarified. She nodded, and a faint, barely noticeable smile appeared on her lips. The very smile I hadn't seen in an eternity. And that smile was dedicated not to me, but to some imaginary clown. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that she was finally talking, and anxiety from the content of her words. Children invent friends, that's normal. But here, in this metal cocoon speeding through the mountain emptiness, her fantasy seemed sinister. Deciding to check, I stood up. Do you want to go see him? Lisa shook her head sharply. No, he's only for me. He said adults scare him. An icy needle of fear pricked my chest. He said? He whispers. She whispered back, mimicking the invisible interlocutor. Very quietly, that was enough. I needed to make sure that a harmless passenger in bright clothes was sitting in the next car, one whom a child's imagination had turned into a clown. Or more likely that there was no one there, and this was just a breakthrough from Lisa's subconscious. I'll be right back, okay? I ruffled her hair. She stared out the window again as if I had already disappeared. I pushed the heavy glass door at the end of the car. It slid open silently, letting me into a small vestibule and then into the next car. The interior was identical to ours. Blue seats with gray headrests, modest tables, luggage racks. The passengers sat motionless. Some dozed, leaning against the window. Others read. No clowns. I walked through the entire car and found myself in the next vestibule. And again I pushed the door. The next car, the same. I walked through it, and another one. By the fourth car, I began to feel a slight unease. The California Zephyr is a long train, but not that long. I should have reached the dining car, or at least first class by now, but the cars were identical. Identical down to the smallest details. The same seat patterns, the same curtains on the windows, the same passengers frozen in identical poses. I started looking closely at the people. A man in a cowboy hat sleeping by the window. An old woman knitting something endless. A young guy with headphones. I had seen them before. In one of the previous cars. I was sure of it. I quickened my pace. The 15th car? The 20th? I lost count. I stopped to catch my breath and looked out the window. Instead of the majestic mountain ranges that should have surrounded the train, a milky white maelstrom raged outside. Thick, impenetrable fog through which not a patch of land or sky was visible. It felt like the train was floating in a void. Panic began to rise in my throat, cold and sticky. I turned to run back to Lisa. But after passing through several cars, I realized I couldn't find ours. They were all the same. I tried to remember our seat number, but my mind was blank. I looked at the passengers' faces. They seemed waxy, lifeless. Their chests didn't rise and fall with breath. They didn't blink. I ran. The doors swung open silently before me, revealing new perspectives of the endless blue salon. My lungs were burning. I screamed, "Lisa!" But the sound of my voice was swallowed by the thick, sound-absorbing atmosphere of the cars. It seemed even the clatter of the wheels had become muffled, as if we were moving through cotton. Suddenly, overhead, from the speakers that had been silent until then, a soft click was heard, followed by breathing. Then a quiet, frightened whisper. I recognized that voice. "Daddy." It was Lisa. "Lisa, where are you?" "Speak louder," I yelled, gasping for air. He says, "You're going the wrong way." Her voice trembled. "You're getting further away." "He's laughing, Daddy." His laugh is so quiet, I froze, drenched in a cold sweat. "Who's laughing, Lisa?" "The clown?" In response, there was only quiet, soundless crying, and then a new voice. A gentle, Swedish, creaky voice like an unoiled door. It was barely audible, as if the speaker had pressed their lips right against the microphone. "Don't interrupt our game, Daddy. We're here, in the very first car, where the fun begins." I rushed forward in the direction the train was originally heading, towards the first car. I didn't know what that meant, but it was the only clue. The cars flashed by like frames of a looped film. The fog outside the windows thickened until it became absolutely black. It felt like we were rushing through cosmic emptiness. And again Lisa's voice from the speakers interrupted by sobs. "He's not a real clown, Dad. His face, it's waxy, and it's slipping. And underneath, there's nothing underneath." The creaky voice hissed, "Not true, little girl. Underneath is an eternal smile. A smile that will never end. Like this trip." I ran until my legs gave way and I collapsed onto a seat in one of the countless cars. I was trapped. This train wasn't taking us to California. It was taking us somewhere beyond the boundaries of reality, into a trap outside space. And my little girl, my Lisa, was left there alone with the thing that was pretending to be a clown. I covered my face with my hands, trying to stifle the horror tearing me apart from the inside. I had abandoned her. I left her alone with that monster because of my own stupid curiosity. Suddenly, the train jerked and began to slow down. The screech of the brakes sounded like heavenly music. I jumped to the window. The fog began to thin. The outlines of a platform emerged. We were arriving at a station. Hope, wild and reckless, flared within me. I rushed to the nearest doors, ready to jump out onto the platform and run back along the train to find Lisa. The train came to a complete stop. The doors hissed open. I jumped out onto the concrete platform and turned around. My heart sank. The train was short, only 7 cars. I was standing at its very tail. I could see its entire length. To infinity. So it was delirium? A hallucination from fatigue? I ran along the train, looking in the windows. In the 3rd car from the end, I saw her. Lisa. She was sitting in her seat, still looking out the window. There was no one next to her. Gasping for breath, I burst into the car. "Lisa!" She slowly turned her head towards me. Her face showed neither fear nor joy, only emptiness. "The clown is gone," she said indifferently. "He said it was time for him to go to the next station." I grabbed her in my arms, holding her so tightly I thought I might break her. She was real, alive. I cried, kissing her hair, muttering words of relief. "What station was that?" I asked the conductor passing by. The man looked at me in surprise. "What station?" "We didn't stop anywhere. We're running late. The next stop is only in 2 hours." An icy cold gripped me. I looked at Lisa. She was smiling her new strange smile, too wide for her little face. "Daddy, can we stay?" she asked in her quiet voice. "I like it here. He said we can ride for a long, long time, until we get bored." I looked at her reflection in the window. And behind her reflection in the black emptiness of the night, for a moment I thought I saw another face, pale with a painted, unnatural smile and empty eye sockets. It flashed and disappeared. The doors closed. The train started moving, and I understood that we were not getting off. We would never get off, because the clown hadn't left. He had just stopped being visible. To me. But he remained here, in this car, on this train which had become our eternal cage. And my daughter kept looking out the window, quietly humming a tune I was sure no one had ever taught her. The fourth story. Every night at exactly 3:04 a.m., the Krasnaya Strela Red Arrow train would rush past my backyard. And every night I saw in the same window of the same carriage a woman's face. She looked directly at me, her hand pressed against the glass in a gesture I couldn't decipher. Yesterday I bought a ticket for that train. It started exactly a year ago. On that first lonely night after Sveta had packed her things and left me for someone who, as she put it, doesn't stare out the window at passing trains. He looks at her. The house was empty, and its silence was broken only by the growing rumble of the Krasnaya Strela, traveling from St. Petersburg to Moscow. That night I stepped onto the porch for a cigarette, and my gaze automatically slid over the flickering lights, and then I saw her. A Platzkartny carriage, the third or fourth window from the end. The light inside was dim, but it was enough. A woman, dark hair pulled back, a pale, almost translucent face, and eyes, huge, filled with such bottomless despair that it took my breath away. Her palm was flattened against the glass, fingers slightly splayed. It seemed she wasn't just looking, but peering into my darkness, searching for some sign of life. The train rushed past, leaving behind only a vibration in the ground and a strange heaviness in my soul. I chalked it up to fatigue, loneliness playing a cruel trick. But the next night at exactly 3:04 I was standing on the porch again, and she was there, in the same window, the same gaze, the same hand on the glass. It became a ritual, my sick secret rendezvous with a ghost of steel and light. I stopped fighting insomnia. I waited for it. I bought a telescope to see the details. I tried to understand her gesture. Was it a warning, a plea, or a farewell? I started keeping notes marking the slightest changes, but there were none. Everything was identical, eerily precise like a well-oiled mechanism. Her stillness was frightening. She didn't blink, didn't move until the train was out of sight. The neighbors would have whispered if they'd known. Mark lost his mind after his wife left. Stares at trains all night. But I didn't care. That woman in the window had become the only constant in my crumbling life. An obsession. And so, exactly 1 year later, I cracked. I had to put an end to it. To confirm she was a product of my sick imagination or to learn the truth. I bought a ticket for the Krasnaya Strela, the night train. My seat was in carriage number 9. I had specifically aimed for the window that, by my calculations, should be the one. Boarding the train felt like stepping into another reality. The smell of disinfectant, Lavsan, and something Swedish, the muffled hum of voices. I found my carriage, climbed the steps, and my heart started pounding like a madman. I walked down the corridor, counting the compartments. There it was, seat 37 by the window. It was empty. Across from it, by the aisle, an elderly man was already sitting, unpacking a sandwich and a paper napkin. I nodded silently to him and sank into my seat. The seat was hard, cold. I put my backpack on my lap and stared out the window. The glass reflected a pale, tense face. My face, the train started moving. I waited. I waited for the woman to appear. But the seat opposite remained empty until well after we left the city. Then it was taken by a student with headphones. She sat until Tver and got off. Then a conscript soldier. No woman with a pale face and a palm pressed to the glass. Despair began to creep up on me. So I really was going crazy? For a year I had built my life around a mirage. When the conductor, a woman in her 50s with a tired but kind face, came by with a tea kettle, I took a chance. I stopped her. "Excuse me," I wanted to ask. "This seat by the window, does a certain woman usually travel here? Young, dark hair, very pale?" The conductor, named Tamara Ivanovna, poured tea for the soldier and turned to me. "Why, do you know her?" "No, I mean..." "I saw her from my window. She's always in this carriage, in this window. Exactly at 3:04. Tamara Ivanovna's face changed. The tired kindness was replaced by wariness and then by outright pallor. She put down the kettle and sat on the edge of the seat next to me, lowering her voice. "Listen, young man, maybe you shouldn't be on this train. The next stop is in half an hour. Get off. Forget about it." "What are you trying to say?" An icy ball tightened in my stomach. She looked around as if afraid of being overheard. A year ago, on this very stretch between Tver and Moscow, a passenger jumped from this carriage. A young woman. From this compartment. They said it was over an unhappy love affair. She was sitting in your seat. And before she sat by the window the whole time, her hand pressed against the glass, just like you described. The world swam before my eyes. So that's who I had seen. A ghost. I had seen a ghost. But why me? Why was she looking right at me? Did you find her? I managed to exhale. Tamara Ivanovna shook her head, her face sorrowful. The train was at full speed. The engineer didn't even feel anything. They only noticed in the morning that the window in the vestibule was slightly open. And they never found her. Case closed. As an accident. She stood up and put a hand on my shoulder. "Get off at the next stop. Don't tempt fate. These are bad places, but I couldn't get off." Now I knew. I hadn't seen a hallucination. I had seen an echo of a tragedy, and I needed to wait for 3:04 to see the place where she had disappeared. Maybe her soul wanted to tell me something. Maybe she needed help. The train raced through the sleeping country. I didn't sleep, staring into the black mirror of the window. The hands on my watch relentlessly approached the fatal mark. 2:50. Firstly, the compartment was quiet. The soldier was dozing, leaning against the wall. I felt goosebumps running down my spine. At 3:03, the train began to pass the familiar area. I recognized the outlines of the hills, a lone farm in the distance. It was the very spot, exactly the same. My heart was pounding like a bird beating against its cage. Furnsur. I stared intently at the reflection in the glass, expecting to see the pale face of the dead woman behind my back, but there was no one there. Only the sleeping soldier, and then I felt an irresistible, irrational desire. To sit as she had sat, to press my palm against the cold glass, to look in the direction from which I had always watched her. From the direction of my house. I slowly raised my hand and pressed it against the glass. My palm instantly became damp from condensation. I stared into the blackness of the night, trying to make out the lights of my house, the porch, my own figure, and I saw. At first it was just a shadow, then a silhouette. And then as the train rushed past my property, the light from the carriage fell on the yard and I saw myself. Myself, standing on the porch with a telescope in my hand, my own face distorted by horror, eyes wide with incomprehension and fear, and my own hand, was pressed against the glass from the outside. I was looking at myself. This was not a ghost from the past, it was a warning from the future. The time loop had snapped shut. I hadn't seen a dead woman. I had seen myself, the one who would die here on these tracks exactly 1 year after her, the one who would jump from this train in despair. I had been obsessed not with her ghost but with a vision of my own death. The horror I had seen in the eyes of that other me was so all-consuming that I screamed and jerked away from the window. The soldier woke up. "What's wrong with you?" he grumbled sleepily. I couldn't utter a word. I was shaking as if with a fever. I had seen it. I had seen my end. And the most terrible thing was that I understood the inevitability. I had boarded this train to break the loop, but instead I had only drawn myself deeper into it. The train passed my house. The vision disappeared. Outside the window there was only night again. But I knew that I was now doomed to go out onto the porch every evening and wait for 3:04. To wait for the train in whose window I would see my own face, full of mortal horror. And one night, exactly 1 year from now, I wouldn't just be standing on the porch. I would be sitting in this carriage, and my hand would be pressed against the glass, and I would be looking at myself from the past, just as I was now looking at myself from the future. A time loop isn't a circle, it's a spiral. It draws you in slowly, inexorably, and the most horrible thing is the awareness. The awareness that your worst nightmare is not a ghost from the outside. It's you, your own reflection in the window of a train rushing towards a cliff. And you can no longer get off because you are already part of the route, part of this endless night flight to your own demise. The fifth story. The railroad dispatch service in Nevada received the last message from freight train number 88. What the hell is crawling on top of the train? And then dead air. But the real horror began afterward, when other trains started passing through tunnel number 77. Those words, shouted into the ether by engineer Frank Morris, became his epitaph. His voice was strained, hoarse with adrenaline, and the last word, from the top, turned into a drawn-out scream cut short. In the dispatch center in Reno, silence fell, broken only by the steady crackle of static. The dispatcher, a young woman named Sarah, tried to raise train number 88 3 times. The only response was a tomb-like silence. The search and rescue operation yielded nothing. The Union Pacific freight train, carrying steel beams from Salt Lake City to Los Angeles, had vanished without a trace. It had entered tunnel number 77, drilled through the Black Rock Range, and never exited. Inside the tunnel, they found no wreckage, no signs of breaking, not a drop of oil. Only thick, impenetrable darkness and the smell of cooled stone. The police, the FBI, railroad inspectors, all were baffled. 5 crew members and hundreds of tons of steel had evaporated. The incident was attributed to unexplained circumstances, and the tunnel was temporarily closed for investigation. But economic pressure was too great. 2 weeks later, after superficial checks, tunnel number 77 was reopened. The first train scheduled through was the high-speed passenger train Desert Wind. That's when the real nightmare began. The engineer of the Desert Wind, a veteran with 30 years of experience named Hector Ramos, made contact as his train approached the tunnel entrance. "Reno, this is Wind. Entering 77. Comes will drop as usual. Copy, Wind. Waiting for you on the other side," replied Sarah, who was on duty that shift. The connection, as expected, cut out the moment the train's nose dove into the black maw of the tunnel. 50 seconds, the standard transit time. Sarah watched the stopwatch. On the 48th second, noise returned to the speakers, first just white noise, then through it, fragments of a voice. Sarah leaned closer. It wasn't Hector's voice. It was the familiar, bone-chillingly familiar, panicked voice of Frank Morris from train number 88. Crawling on top of the train. God, it's big, and again dead air. And immediately after, the clear, confident voice of Hector Ramos, "Reno, Wind." Exited the tunnel. All good, Sarah was stunned. She tried to ask Hector if he'd heard anything. He was just perplexed. "Quiet, Sarah, just the rumble of the wheels. Like always in tunnels." At first they thought it was an equipment glitch, some kind of recording error that had accidentally leaked into the channel. But the next day, the same thing happened with a coal freight. And again, for a few seconds after exiting the tunnel, the same fragment of the panicked transmission from number 88 played over the air. Only this time it was a fraction of a second longer. After the word "it," and a deafening screech of tearing metal was heard, as if a roof of a carriage was being peeled open like a tin can. The news spread through Nevada's railroad community like wildfire. Engineers started getting nervous. Tunnel number 77 was nicknamed Echo Canyon. Engineers, one after another, began refusing routes that went through it, demanding a reinvestigation of the number 88 disappearance. The company management was furious. Delays were costing a fortune. They sent their own technicians who checked all the repeaters, cables, and equipment on the trains and in the dispatch center. No malfunctions were found. The recording was not located on any servers. It existed only over the airwaves in those few seconds after exiting the tunnel. Then, under strict supervision, a diagnostic train with scientists and state-of-the-art equipment was sent through the tunnel. They recorded the entire spectrum of radio waves. The results shocked everyone. When the train exited the tunnel, sensitive microphones picked up something that shouldn't have been. Besides Frank's voice, other sounds were audible in the channel. unhuman screams full of such agony that it made the researchers' blood run cold. Creaking and crashing that acoustic analysis identified as the sound of steel being crushed with incredible force. And the most terrifying, a heavy, ragged, wet breathing. It sounded right into the microphone as if someone's lungs were torn. But the creature was still trying to breathe. And with each new train passage, the voice grew longer and clearer. It now started not from the middle of the phrase, but from the very beginning of Frank's last message. "Reno, do you copy? Something's wrong. On the roof." "What the hell is crawling on top of the train? God, it's big, Sound of tearing metal. "Ah, no! Get away, unintelligible, please." Heavy breathing. They're all dead. It's looking at me. It's breathing. Panic among the railroad workers peaked. Work through tunnel number 77 was completely paralyzed. The company suffered colossal losses. Federal authorities had to step in. A historian named Dr. Alan Crow, a specialist in the cultures of Nevada's indigenous peoples, was brought into the investigation almost by chance. Reviewing old maps and surveyors' reports from the time of the railroad's construction in the late 19th century, he stumbled upon an interesting document. In the journal of the engineer who built tunnel number 77, there was a brief, almost casual entry. "Strange bones found during excavation. Resemble human, but too large. A shaman from the Paiute tribe warned we were disturbing the ancient sleep of the Great Spirit that lives in the stone." Ignored him. Behind schedule. Dr. Crow went to the reservation, found the tribal elders. After much persuasion and observance of rituals, one of them, a very old man named Standing Bear, agreed to speak. His eyes, cloudy with age, looked through Alan deep into the centuries. "You have disturbed that which should not awaken." The old man's voice was a whisper, like the rustle of dry leaves. "It is not a spirit. Spirits move on. This is ancient life. That which was here before men, before buffalo, before the earth itself. It slept in the stone in the very heart of the mountain. Your explosions woke it. It is hungry, and it is lonely. But what is it? And why do we hear this voice?" asked Alan. "It is trying to speak. Its voice is not a sound heard by ears. It is born not in a larynx, but in the very void, in the silence between worlds. Your iron snakes. Their loud cries, he meant radio waves. They create a bridge, for a moment. It uses this bridge to send its cry, the cry of the one it consumed. His fear, his last moment, it absorbed them like a sponge. And now it reproduces them, trying to call out, to understand, to make contact. Contact? But it kills. A child reaching towards an anthill also does not understand it is breaking fragile lives." The old man shook his head. "For it, your trains are just flashes of noise in the eternal silence of its world." It tries to answer. But its answer is death. Its nature is such. It is not evil, it is just different. Alan Crow returned with this knowledge. The report was delivered to the management. A creature living in the stone. An ancient predator trapped in the non-Euclidean space of the tunnel. It is invisible, intangible in our understanding, but it can interact with matter on a quantum level, distorting reality and consuming anything that falls into its trap. The radio waves of passing trains momentarily stabilize this anomaly, allowing the echo of the last tragedy, the agony of train number 88, to seep into our world. The only possible decision was made. Tunnel number 77 was to be permanently sealed. Concrete walls several meters thick were erected at both ends. The surrounding area was declared a restricted zone under the pretext of geological instability. But sometimes, very rarely, when a storm rages in the mountains and the atmosphere is charged with electricity, radio amateurs on the outskirts of Reno pick up strange signals on their headphones. Fragments of panicked messages, the screech of metal, and heavy, ragged breathing. It has grown quieter but clearer, and new words have appeared in it, words that weren't in the original recording, as if the creature practicing has learned to form them from fragments of others' thoughts. Through the noise and static, a whisper full of ancient, non-human longing comes through. "Where are you? Why don't you answer? I am here. I am always here, Let me out. And the most terrifying question, one that freezes the blood, is this pain? What I feel. Is this called pain? The tunnel is sealed, but the creature inside is not dead. It is learning, and every year, its voice on the airwaves becomes more and more intelligible. The sixth story. A ticket for the private night express Silver Moon cost a fortune, but a memo was attached to all tickets. It contained only 3 rules. Never leave your compartment after midnight. If the train stops in an open field, close the curtains and do not look outside. If you hear 3 knocks on your door, do not respond under any circumstances. I smirked. I broke all 3. My name is Arthur van der Weide. If the surname sounds familiar, it's because you've probably flown on our planes, use our internet, or drink water from our bottles. The world is a playground for people like me, and its rules are merely annoying obstacles created for those who cannot afford to ignore them. The trip on the Silver Moon was my latest whim. Too much buzz in the press about this exclusive game for billionaires crossing the Alps in unimaginable luxury. My yacht had bored me. The private jet induced yawns, and I decided to indulge in retro glamour. The train was indeed a masterpiece. Polished mahogany, chrome details, velvet sofas. My compartment resembled a suite at the Ritz, only on wheels. The minibar contained Cristal champagne, and on the table lay that very memo, elegantly printed on heavy parchment paper. I skimmed through these 3 points and snorted. Obviously part of the show, creating an atmosphere of mystery for bored tycoons. A nice try. My neighbor in the carriage, a certain Herr Müller, a German industrialist with a face like a dried pear, took the rules seriously. Have you read it, Herr van der Weide? He asked at dinner, looking at me sternly over a glass of Burgundy. Oh yes, I grinned. A charming bedtime story. Don't you think we're a bit too old for such games? This is not a game, Müller snapped. There are laws here. They should be obeyed. Laws exist to be challenged, my dear, or to pay off those who bypass them. Müller shook his head and didn't bring up the topic again. There was something in his eyes that I readily took for fear. It only amused me. After dinner, I returned to my compartment. The train raced on, swaying softly, lulling the passengers. I finished my cognac and glanced at the clock. 1:15 midnight. Perfect. The goal of my little rebellion was simple. To get to the baggage car where rumors had it this train was transporting a batch of rare Burgundy from the personal cellar of some emir. I wanted to uncork a bottle right there, maybe take a picture for Instagram with the hashtag, "Rules are for losers." The thought that I was breaking some stupid prohibition gave the enterprise a special piquancy. Right at midnight, I stepped out into the corridor. Violation of rule number 1. The corridor was empty and bathed in a ghostly half-light. Night lights cast long shadows. The air was still and thick. I headed towards the rear of the train, whistling softly to myself. The floor beneath my feet was springy, the carpet muffling my steps. All the compartments were locked, not a sliver of light under the doors. It seemed the entire train except for me was fast asleep, and that's when I noticed something strange. The windows I passed showed no reflection of the carriage's interior. Not me, not the corridor, not the soft light. Instead, beyond the glass swirled an absolutely black, thick gloom. Not the night darkness with silhouettes of mountains or trees, but a dense, velvety void, as if the train was speeding through a cosmic vacuum. I stopped and pressed my face against the cold glass, trying to see something. No stars, no moon, no lights of distant cities, nothing, just darkness. But that wasn't the worst part. From time to time, in this blackness right along the train's path, strange shadows drifted past, tall, twisted, of non-human proportions. They didn't walk or fly. They glided like shadows from non-existent torches. Sometimes they appeared in the windows for an instant, and I thought I saw the outlines of overly long limbs, curves of spines defying anatomy. These weren't reflections. This was something outside. Violation of rule number 2 was already in the air, even though the train hadn't stopped yet. An inexplicable anxiety gripped me. My self-confidence began to melt. yielding to an ancient animal instinct. What if Muller was right? What if this wasn't a show? I quickened my pace, deciding to carry out my plan and return to the compartment as soon as possible. It was at that moment that the train shuddered and stopped. The braking wasn't sharp, but somehow unnatural. As if we had driven into something viscous that absorbed our inertia. The rumble of the wheels ceased and a ringing, absolute silence fell. I looked out the window. The same impenetrable darkness. The train was standing, in the middle of nothing. Rule number 2 surfaced in my memory with crystal clarity. If the train stops in an open field, close the curtains and do not look outside. But we weren't in a field. We were in pure, absolute blackness. Logic suggested the rule didn't apply, but fear, cold and sticky, whispered that it was much worse. Curiosity, my main vice and driving force, overcame fear. I walked to the nearest window and slowly, almost against my will, drew aside the heavy velvet curtain. My heart sank and froze. We were standing on a plain, but it wasn't any land I knew. The surface was flat as a table and stretched to the horizon, merging with the black, starless sky. And on this plain, as far as the eye could see, stood them, a crowd of silent, desiccated figures in rags. There were hundreds, thousands of them. They stood motionless, their faces hidden in deep shadows beneath hoods. They didn't move, didn't make a sound. They just watched. Watched the train. Watched me. Their postures were unnatural, as if their bones had been broken and fused back together at strange angles. Long, crooked fingers hung from their sleeves. They emanated not evil, but something much more ancient and monstrous: indifference. The indifference of the universe to a tiny, insolent insect that dared to draw attention to itself. I recoiled from the window, gasping for air. My hand trembled. I realized I had made a fatal mistake. These rules, they weren't part of the entertainment. They were survival instructions. A shield, I rushed back to my compartment. The corridor, which a minute ago had seemed short, now stretched into an endless labyrinth. My footsteps on the soft carpet sounded deafeningly loud in the dead silence. I burst into my compartment, slammed the door, and leaned against it with my back, trying to catch my breath. And then came the knock. Not loud, not aggressive. Precise, measured, like a metronome. 3 distinct knocks on my compartment door. Knock, knock, knock. Rule number 3 flared in my brain like red-hot iron. If you hear 3 knocks on your door, do not respond under any circumstances. Blood pounded in my temples. My entire being, every cell in my body screamed to be silent, to hide, to play dead. But the remnants of my inflated pride, my contempt for any prohibitions, raised their heads. This was a trap for simpletons. Someone or something was testing my strength. And I, Arthur van der Weide, was not going to fail this test. A stupid, suicidal smirk touched my lips. I took a deep breath and said clearly, loudly, with defiance, "Who's there?" The knocking stopped. A silence even more oppressive than before descended. I froze, listening. Nothing. Only my heart pounding wildly. I felt a surge of pride. See, it's all theater. I was stronger than their stupid superstitions. That surge lasted only an instant. Then my compartment door shuddered. Not from a blow, but as if from an incredible quiet pressure. The metal frame creaked, then cracked. I jumped back from it, staring in horror. The latch snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The massive wooden door tore from its hinges and crashed to the floor inside the compartment, with a dull thud. And at the same moment, a wave of similar sounds rolled through the entire carriage. Cracking, clanging, dull blows. All the doors. Every single one, silence returned. Deep, all-consuming, and then I heard it. A barely perceptible rustle, not footsteps in the usual sense, but a light, shuffling movement, as if someone was dragging dry fingers across the velvet carpet. It was approaching. From it came a faint smell of dust, old parchment, and distant cold stone. And through this rustle, I heard a quiet, contented purring. It was low, deep, emanating not from a throat, but from the very gullet of the universe. There was no malice in this sound, no hunger. There was satisfaction, Like a cat that had finally reached the mouse trapped in a jar, I retreated to the farthest corner of the compartment, pressing myself against the wall. Tears streamed down my face, but I couldn't make a sound. My arrogance had evaporated, leaving only pure, undiluted horror. The rules were not for my comfort. They were for my protection, and now the protection was gone. The door was open. The rustling footsteps stopped in the doorway. A shadow, long and faceless, fell over me. The purring grew louder. I closed my eyes, but it didn't help. I already understood everything. The last thing I saw before the darkness finally consumed me was my reflection in a shard of the mirror on the wall. My own face distorted in a grimace of silent horror, and behind my back, filling the entire doorway, stood that same desiccated figure in rags. And in the depths of its hood, where a face should have been, 2 tiny cold points flickered, full of indifferent curiosity for everything that lies beyond the rules. And in the depths of its hood, where a face should have been, 2 tiny cold points flickered, full of indifferent curiosity for everything that lies beyond the rules. My consciousness blurred. I didn't faint, no. It simply refused to perceive the reality unfolding before me. It was a defense mechanism, a pathetic attempt by my mind to hide from the impossible. I felt the cold emanating from the figure enveloping me, penetrating through my skin, through my muscles, down to my bones. It wasn't the cold of temperature, but the cold of a void, of absolute zero, where there is no life, no light, no time. The rustling footsteps resumed. The creature entered the compartment. It didn't step. It seemed to glide in, its rags sliding silently across the floor. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I was paralyzed, a rabbit before a boa constrictor. Only my eyes, frozen in horror, followed the approaching shadow. It stopped a centimeter from me. Long, crooked fingers like dried roots slowly rose and touched my forehead. The touch was light as a cobweb, but a convulsion ran through my entire body. Fragments of memories flashed through my head, but not my own. Alien lives, alien fears, alien final moments. I saw the faces of other passengers, those who, like me, had once broken the rules. I felt their despair, their soul-chilling terror. They were here. All of them. They had become part of this faceless crowd, part of this eternal silent waiting. Then came a voice. But it didn't sound from outside. It arose right inside my head, quiet, without intonation, like the creaking of old wood. You called. We came. You looked. You saw. Now you belong to the void. You have become part of the landscape. I tried to scream mentally, to ask, "What do you want from me?" But I couldn't even form that thought. The creature was reading me like an open book. We want nothing. We exist. You crossed the boundary. You brought noise into the silence. Now the noise must be absorbed. Such is the law. Not ours. Universal. Its hand gently moved from my forehead to my shoulder, and then I felt myself beginning to change. Not physically, my flesh remained in place, but my eye, my personality, everything that made me Arthur van der Weide, began to dissolve. Fear, pride, memories, desires, all of it was being erased like a drawing on wet glass. It was replaced by a strange, indifferent calm. I stopped being afraid. I stopped wanting. I simply was. The creature turned and glided out of the compartment. Its purring gradually faded in the corridor. The paralysis released me. I slowly rose to my feet. My movements were smooth, alien. I stepped out into the corridor. The carriage was empty. All the doors gaped with black openings. There was no one in the other compartments. No Miller, no other passengers. Only silence. The train was still standing. I walked to a window and pulled back the curtain. The crowd of creatures in rags stood in their place, but now their faceless hoods were turned not towards the train, but towards me, and I looked at them, and in that gaze there was no fear, no disgust. There was only a cold, detached acknowledgement. I understood that they were waiting. I slowly walked down the corridor to the exit. The carriage door was wide open. The steps led down to the dark, flat plain. I descended. The ground under my feet was hard and cold. I took a few steps and turned around. The silver moon stood like a giant toy abandoned in a sandbox. Its windows were dark. Then I turned to face the crowd and walked towards them. They parted, letting me into their ranks. I stood among them. My body assumed the same unnatural crooked posture. Rags that hadn't been on me a second ago now hung from my shoulders, heavy and dusty. I raised my head and looked ahead into the blackness of the horizon. No thoughts or emotions remained within me. Only one knowledge. The knowledge that we are waiting for the next train. The next arrogant fool who would consider the rules a mere formality. Waiting to remind the universe that even for someone like Arthur van der Weide, there are laws that cannot be bought. The laws of silence. Somewhere in the distance, on the edge of this flat world, a faint, growing whistle sounded. A new train was approaching the boundary, and I, like thousands of others around me, prepared to watch.